Hey everyone, Elizabeth here. The Last Laugh delivers stories that leave you speechless. If you're here for it, hit subscribe and let's go.
I grew up as the family disappointment in a household that worshipped intellectual credentials. My mother, Patricia Monroe, held a PhD in comparative literature from Columbia. She'd published exactly 3 academic papers in 20 years and never let anyone forget it. She ran a prestigious book club in our affluent Connecticut suburb, where membership required either an advanced degree or a substantial donation to the local library foundation. My father was a tenured philosophy professor. My sister Claire had graduated summa cum laude from Wellesley and was now getting her master's in art history at NYU. Her fiancé Marcus had gone to Yale Law and worked at a white shoe Manhattan firm. Then there was me, Emma Monroe, the one who'd gone to a state school, the one who'd majored in creative writing instead of something practical, the one who'd moved to a tiny apartment in Brooklyn and worked at an independent bookstore for minimum wage. It's called paying your dues, I told them when I graduated at 22. It's called wasting your potential, my mother had replied, disappointment dripping from every word. That was 8 years ago. For 8 years, I'd endured Sunday dinners where my mother discussed her book club's latest selections while pointedly avoiding asking about my life. Where my sister talked about her gallery openings and Marcus's cases while I quietly ate my overcooked salmon. Emma still works at that little bookstore, my mother would tell her friends, the way someone might say, Emma still has that unfortunate rash. What they didn't know was that I hadn't worked at the bookstore in 6 years. What they didn't know was that the scribbling I did in my spare time had become something else entirely. What they didn't know was that I'd been living a completely different life, and I'd deliberately kept them out of it. It started small. A short story published in a literary magazine nobody had heard of. Then another in a slightly more prestigious journal. Then an essay that went viral on a respected culture website. By 24, I'd published my first novel under a pen name. The pen name was strategic. I chose E.M. Rivers because it was neutral, professional, and completely disconnected from Emma Monroe, the family disappointment who works retail. The novel was a literary thriller about family secrets and the weight of expectations. Critics called it devastatingly insightful and a remarkable debut. It sold respectably for a first novel, 40,000 copies in hardcover. My family never knew it existed. At Sunday dinners when they asked what I was still doing, I'd say, working at the bookstore writing a bit. They'd nod with barely concealed pity and change the subject. My second novel came out when I was 26. It hit the New York Times bestseller list and stayed there for 12 weeks. Film rights sold for low 7 figures. I quit the bookstore and bought a beautiful brownstone apartment in Park Slope. Still in that cramped studio? My mother would ask. Yeah, I'd lie. Still there. I told myself I was protecting my work. That I didn't want their judgment tainting something I loved. That I was building a career on my own terms without their credentials or connections or approval. But the truth was simpler. I was testing them. Every Sunday dinner was a test they failed. Every dismissive comment, every time they didn't ask about my writing, every time they talked about Claire's achievements while treating mine as a cute hobby, it was evidence I was collecting. Evidence that they didn't actually care about me. Just about how I reflected on them. My third novel came out last year. It was shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize in fiction. The ceremony was in 3 weeks. I'd already bought my dress, a stunning emerald silk gown that cost more than my mother spent on her entire wardrobe. My publisher Adrienne Chin had become more than my advocate. She was my friend, my mentor, the person who'd believed in me when I was nobody. She knew about my family. She knew I'd kept my success hidden. They're going to find out eventually, she'd said over lunch last month. I know, I'd replied. I'm just waiting for the right moment. That moment arrived 2 weeks ago, in the form of a cream-colored envelope with my mother's perfect calligraphy. I stared at the invitation over my morning coffee, sitting in my sunlit kitchen with its marble counters and custom cabinets. Patricia Monroe requests the pleasure of your company at the annual Literary Patrons Fundraiser benefiting the Westport Library Foundation. Black tie. Saturday, April 15th, 7 p.m. Then in a separate note card tucked inside in my mother's handwriting. Emma, I debated including you but this is rather a sophisticated crowd. Literary patrons only. You wouldn't understand most of the conversation. Perhaps it's best you sit this one out. We'll see you at Sunday dinner next week. Mother. I read it 3 times, each word sharper than the last. You wouldn't understand the conversation. I'd been shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize and my own mother thought I wouldn't understand a conversation about books. My phone buzzed. A text from Claire. Did you get Mom's invitation? Marcus went to Yale, so we're obviously going. Mom said it's probably not your scene. No offense, but she's right. These are serious literary people. Hugs and kisses. I set my coffee down carefully, my hands completely steady. I wasn't hurt. I was past hurt. I was ready. I called Adrian. The fundraiser my mother's hosting? I need you to do something for me. The Westport Library Foundation fundraiser was one of the premier literary events in Connecticut. Every year, a prominent publisher sponsored it, and they brought a surprise guest author for a talk and book signing. This year's sponsor was Meridian House, one of the most prestigious literary publishers in New York. This year's sponsor was my publisher. Adrian had been planning to bring Malcolm Chin, a critically acclaimed memoirist, as the surprise guest. When I called her with my request, she was silent for a long moment. Are you absolutely sure about this? She asked finally. I've never been more sure of anything. Emma, this is going to be nuclear. I know. Your relationship with your family might never recover. Adrian, there's no relationship to recover. They don't know me. They've never asked to know me. They've spent 8 years dismissing everything I am while celebrating everything I'm not. Another pause. Then, okay. Let's do it. The next 2 weeks were careful choreography. Adrian coordinated with the foundation director, who was thrilled to have a Pulitzer finalist instead of the originally planned author. My mother, who was on the foundation board but not involved in programming, had no idea about the change. I bought a new dress, charcoal silk with a subtle shimmer, elegant but understated. I had my hair done professionally. I looked like exactly what I was. A successful author about to step into the spotlight I'd always deserved. The night before the event, Adrian called. Last chance to back out. Not a chance. Then I'll see you tomorrow. Emma, I'm proud of you. Not just for your writing but for this. For refusing to shrink yourself anymore. I slept better that night than I had in years. The Westport Library Foundation occupied a beautiful historic building with soaring ceilings and floor-to-ceiling windows. For the fundraiser, they transformed the main reading room into an elegant event space with round tables, crystal and dramatic floral centerpieces. I arrived exactly on time, blending into the crowd of well-dressed guests. I spotted my family immediately. My mother held court near the bar, resplendent in a navy gown and the pearl necklace my father had given her for their anniversary. She was surrounded by her book club friends, all of them laughing at something she'd said. Claire stood with Marcus near the silent auction tables. She wore red, always demanding attention. Marcus had his arm around her waist, looking every inch the successful attorney. My father lingered near the hors d'oeuvres, talking to another professor about something undoubtedly philosophical and tedious. None of them saw me. I was just another guest in elegant clothes, another face in a room full of literary patrons. I found my assigned seat at a table near the front. Not at my family's table, obviously. I hadn't been assigned seating because I hadn't RSVP'd. I was here as the surprise guest, with reserved seating at the VIP table near the podium. The table included Adrian, 2 board members and the foundation director. Ms. Rivers, the director whispered as I sat down. He was in on the plan. We're so honored to have you here. Your mother has no idea. None whatsoever. This is going to be quite the revelation. Dinner was served. I ate slowly, watching my family across the room. My mother laughed loudly at something, her hand on her book club president's arm. Claire took a selfie with Marcus, probably for Instagram. My father looked bored. None of them glanced my direction even once. Finally, dessert was cleared and the foundation director approached the podium. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for our annual Literary Patrons fundraiser. Polite applause. As you know, each year we're fortunate enough to partner with a major publishing house to bring you an intimate evening with a celebrated author. My mother sat up straighter, smoothing her dress. She loved this part. Loved mingling with real writers afterward, dropping names at future book club meetings. This year we're partnered with Meridian House, one of the finest literary publishers in the country. And their editorial director Adrian Chin, is here tonight with a very special guest. Adrienne stood, elegant in black, and took the microphone. She made eye contact with me briefly, then addressed the room. Thank you, Margaret. Meridian House is thrilled to be here tonight. For nearly a century, we've been committed to publishing literature that challenges, illuminates, and endures. My mother nodded approvingly from her table. Tonight's surprise guest embodies everything we value: literary excellence, unflinching honesty, and extraordinary storytelling craft. Claire whispered something to Marcus, probably speculating about who it might be. This author's debut novel was called A Stunning Arrival by the Times. Their second novel spent 3 months on the bestseller list. Their third novel, published last year, has been shortlisted for the Pulitzer Prize. A murmur of excitement rippled through the room. The Pulitzer announcement had been major news in literary circles. My mother's face lit up. She lived for moments like this. Proximity to prestige. This author writes under the name E.M. Rivers, Adrienne continued. My mother leaned forward, fully engaged now. I could see her already planning how she'd tell people she'd met me. How she'd attended an intimate evening with a Pulitzer finalist. But tonight I'm honored to introduce you to the person behind the pen name. Someone who's been writing brilliantly for nearly a decade, building a remarkable career while remaining beautifully private about her success. Adrienne's eyes found mine. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the author of The Weight We Carry, Borrowed Light, and the Pulitzer finalist, The Architecture of Silence, Emma Monroe. For 3 full seconds there was absolute silence. Then I stood. The room erupted in applause, but I only watched my family's table. My mother's face drained of all color. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. She looked exactly like a fish pulled from water, gasping and completely disoriented. Claire dropped her wine glass. It shattered on the floor, deep red spreading across the white tablecloth like blood. Marcus stared, his arm frozen around Claire's waist. My father had gone completely rigid, his face unreadable. I walked to the podium with my head high, every step deliberate. I'd imagined this moment for 2 weeks, but the reality was sweeter than any fantasy. Adrienne handed me the microphone and squeezed my hand briefly before returning to her seat. I looked out at the crowd of 200 people, Connecticut's literary elite, my mother's peers, the people she'd been so certain I wouldn't be able to converse with. Thank you, Adrienne, and thank you all for having me tonight, I began, my voice steady and clear. I know I'm a surprise guest in more ways than one. Polite laughter. Everyone except my family. I grew up about 20 minutes from here. In a house full of books, with parents who valued education and intellectual discourse above almost everything else. My mother's hand was pressed to her throat. I was raised to believe that literature mattered. That words had power. That stories could change lives. I paused, letting that sink in. But I was also raised to believe that there was a hierarchy to literature. That academic credentials mattered more than actual writing. That publishing in the right journals for the right audiences was more important than reaching readers. That literary success had to look a certain way, preferably with an Ivy League degree attached. A few uncomfortable shifts in the audience. My mother looked like she might be sick. When I graduated from UConn, not an Ivy as I was frequently reminded, I told my family I wanted to be a writer. They smiled politely and asked what my backup plan was. More uncomfortable silence. So I got a job at a bookstore. Minimum wage, no benefits, but surrounded by stories. And every morning before my shift, every night after it ended, I wrote. Not for credentials. Not for prestige. But because I couldn't not write. I caught Adrienne's eye. She was smiling proud. I published my first novel at 24. My family never knew because they'd stopped asking about my writing years earlier. They assumed it was just a hobby, something I'd grow out of once I faced reality. Claire had tears streaming down her face, but I couldn't tell if they were from shame or anger. I chose a pen name because I wanted my work to stand on its own merit. No family connections, no prestigious credentials to open doors. Just the words on the page. I held up my third novel, the one that had been shortlisted for the Pulitzer. The Architecture of Silence is about a woman who builds an entire life that her family never sees because they're too busy judging the life they think she's living. It's about the weight of expectations and the freedom of letting them go. It's about discovering that the people who are supposed to know you best can sometimes know you the least. My mother made a small sound, almost a sob. It's also about forgiveness. Not the kind where you excuse bad behavior, but the kind where you release yourself from needing validation from people who've proven they can't give it. I set the book down and looked directly at my family's table for the first time. I received an invitation to tonight's event with a note explaining that I wouldn't understand the conversation. That this wasn't my scene. That I should sit this one out. Gasps rippled through the audience. Several people turned to look at my mother's table. The person who sent that invitation had no idea that I'm E.M. Rivers. How could they? They never asked. In 8 years they never once asked to read my work. Never asked if I'd been published. Never asked if the writing I mentioned casually at family dinners had become anything more than a hobby. My voice stayed calm, factual. I wasn't here for revenge. I was here for truth. I don't say this to humiliate anyone. I say it because I think there's a larger truth here that matters. You can't claim to value something while dismissing everyone who doesn't pursue it the way you think they should. You can't say you love literature while being blind to the literature being created right in front of you. I saw several people nodding. My family spent 8 years treating me like a disappointment because I didn't have the right credentials or the right job or the right trajectory. Meanwhile, I was building exactly the career they claimed to respect, just not in the package they expected. Another pause. So yes, Mother, I did come to your literary patrons event. And yes, I do understand the conversation. Because I'm not just part of the conversation, I'm helping to shape it. The applause started slowly, then built into something thunderous. People stood. The standing ovation lasted nearly a minute. Through it all, my family sat frozen at their table, a small island of stillness in a sea of movement. When the applause finally died down, I smiled, genuinely, freely. Now, I'd love to take some questions, read a brief passage from The Architecture of Silence, and then I'll be signing books at the table by the entrance. All proceeds from tonight's book sales go directly to the foundation, supporting literacy programs and providing resources for aspiring writers, especially those who might not have traditional credentials or family support. That last part was deliberate. Waited. My mother understood. I watched the understanding cross her face like a shadow. The Q&A was electric. People asked intelligent, engaged questions about my writing process, my influences, the themes in my work. These were exactly the conversations my mother had been certain I couldn't handle. I answered each question thoughtfully, professionally. This was my element. This had always been my element. From the corner of my eye, I watched my family. My mother sat rigid, her hands folded in her lap. She didn't look at me. She didn't look at anyone. Claire kept crying silently, mascara streaking down her cheeks. Marcus had his arm around her, but he kept glancing at me with something that looked like awe. My father stared at his empty dessert plate. After the Q&A, I read the opening chapter of The Architecture of Silence. The chapter where the protagonist receives a family invitation telling her she's not good enough to attend their celebration. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Then I moved to the signing table. The line stretched across the room. People I'd never met told me my books had changed their lives, had helped them feel seen, had given them permission to pursue their dreams despite family doubts. My mother told me I'd never make it as an artist, one woman said, tears in her eyes. Your books helped me keep going. My father said creative writing was a waste of time, a young man added. I'm getting my MFA next year. Each person was validation, not that I needed it anymore, but it was sweet nonetheless. My family left 45 minutes into the signing. They didn't approach. They didn't congratulate me. They simply gathered their coats and slipped out a side exit. I watched them go and felt nothing but relief. Adrian waited until the last book was signed, the last reader thanked, before approaching. How do you feel? She asked. Free, I said simply. We went to a late-night diner in Westport, just the two of us, and ordered pancakes and coffee. I'd just publicly dismantled my family's 8-year narrative about my life, and I was eating pancakes at midnight. Your phone's going to explode tomorrow, Adrian warned. This is going to be everywhere. Pulitzer finalist reveals identity at family event after years of dismissal. The literary world loves a good underdog story. Let it explode. Your family will call. I know. What are you going to say? I thought about that while I drowned my pancakes in syrup. That I love them. That I always have. But that I'm done shrinking myself to fit their expectations. They can either love me as I actually am or they can keep loving the person they wish I was. But I'm not pretending anymore. Adrian raised her coffee cup. To not pretending. To not pretending. My phone started ringing at 6:47 a.m. the next morning. I let it ring. By noon I had 63 missed calls. 20 from my mother. 15 from Claire. 12 from my father. The rest from various relatives and family friends. My voicemail was full. I listened to exactly one message. My mother's first one, left at 7:02 a.m. Emma. This is your mother. We need to talk. What you did last night was. We need to talk. Call me immediately. Her voice shook. Not with anger. With something else. Something I'd never heard from her before. Fear. I deleted it and turned my phone off. The media coverage was exactly what Adrian had predicted. Every literary blog, magazine, and news site ran some version of the story. Author's secret identity revealed at family event. Pulitzer finalist was hiding in plain sight. The daughter they dismissed wrote the book they're reading. The New York Times ran a feature interview I'd done with them 2 days earlier, timed to release after the fundraiser. In it, I talked extensively about family expectations, imposter syndrome, and the courage it takes to pursue creative work without traditional support. The article ended with a quote. Success doesn't always look like what your family expects. Sometimes that's exactly what makes it yours. It went viral. My book sales tripled. The Architecture of Silence hit #1 on the Times bestseller list for the first time. 3 days after the fundraiser, I finally listened to the rest of the messages. My mother's evolved from demanding to pleading. Emma, please. We need to explain. You don't understand. Please call us. Claire's were apologetic. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. I never. God, I've been such a terrible sister. Please talk to me. My father's were the shortest. Emma. I'm sorry. I should have asked. I should have seen you. 1 week after the fundraiser, I met them at a neutral location. A coffee shop in Fairfield, halfway between my Brooklyn apartment and their Connecticut house. They arrived together looking smaller than I remembered. My mother had aged a decade in a week. Claire's eyes were red-rimmed. My father looked defeated. I ordered my coffee and sat down across from them. Thank you for coming, my mother began. I almost didn't. Silence. Emma, we had no idea, Claire said. How could we not know? How could we be so blind? You didn't ask, I said simply. For 8 years you didn't ask. You assumed, you dismissed, you judged. But you never asked. We thought. My mother trailed off. You thought I was a failure. You thought my writing was a hobby. You thought I worked at a bookstore because I couldn't do anything better. We were wrong, my father said quietly. Profoundly wrong. You were. But that's not actually what hurts most. They waited. What hurts is that you were okay with it. You were okay with thinking I was a failure. You were okay with me being the family disappointment. You didn't try to help, you didn't try to understand. You just wrote me off. My mother's tears started. Emma, no. We love you. You love the idea of me. You love the daughter who fits your expectations. You don't actually know me at all. Then let us, Claire begged. Let us know you. Please. I looked at each of them in turn. These people who'd raised me, shaped me, disappointed me, and ultimately freed me by forcing me to become strong enough to stand alone. I'll think about it, I said finally. But not because you're asking. Because I want to believe people can change. That families can heal. That maybe someday you'll value me for who I actually am instead of who you wanted me to be. I stood up to leave. Emma, my mother said desperately. What do we do now? You start by reading my books, Mother. All 3 of them. Not because they're Pulitzer finalists or bestsellers. But because I wrote them. Because they're pieces of me I tried to share with you in the only way I knew how. We will, she whispered. I promise. And Mother, the next time you host a literary event, I won't need an invitation. Because I'll already belong there. I always did. The Pulitzer Prize ceremony was held in May at Columbia University. I didn't win. The prize went to a remarkable historical novel about immigration, but being a finalist was honor enough. The ceremony was beautiful, elegant, everything I'd dreamed. My family wasn't there. I hadn't invited them. But Adrian was there. And my best friend from the bookstore days, who'd read my first terrible drafts and insisted I keep going. And my agent who'd believed in me when I was a nobody with a manuscript. The people who'd actually seen me. Who'd actually asked. Who'd actually been there. After the ceremony, my publisher hosted a celebration at a restaurant in Manhattan. 200 people. Editors, authors, agents, readers who'd become friends. Halfway through the evening my phone buzzed. A text from my mother. We watched the live stream. You looked beautiful. We're reading your second book now. Claire finished the first one last week. She said she finally understands. So do I. We're proud of you, Emma. I'm sorry it took so long to say it. I'm sorry we made you feel you had to hide. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, we'd like to try again. No expectations. His love. Mom. I read it twice then put my phone away. Maybe someday I'd be ready. Maybe someday they'd prove they'd really changed. Maybe someday, I'm proud of you, would come before the achievements instead of after, would be about who I was instead of what I'd accomplished. Maybe. But tonight I was exactly where I belonged. Surrounded by people who'd celebrated me long before the prizes and the bestseller lists and the public vindication. Tonight I was just Emma Monroe. Not the family disappointment. Not the secret success. Not the Pulitzer finalist. Just a writer who'd found her voice, her people, and her freedom. And that was more than enough. Adrienne raised her glass for a toast. To Emma. Who taught us all that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is become yourself, even when the people who should support you can't see who you're becoming. To Emma, everyone echoed. I looked around the room at faces full of genuine affection, real pride, authentic support. These were my people. This was my family. And I'd built it all myself, word by word, page by page, choosing courage over approval every single day. The invitation had been right about one thing. It wasn't my mother's scene. It was mine. It had always been mine. I just had to claim it,